The first explosion shattered the night like a scream. Lyra jerked around, the silver tray in her hands slipping as the castle trembled beneath her feet, goblets crashing and red wine spilling across the black marble like fresh blood. Outside, the tall arched windows, the sky above the vampire citadel glowed orange, flames licking up the ancient stone towers that had always felt cold and untouchable. Now they burned. Servants ran in every direction, some crying, some silent with terror, while vampire nobles in dark cloaks swept past in blurs, their eyes glowing red as they rushed toward the battle. None of them looked at Lyra. They never did. To them she was just a human maid, a shadow in a gray dress, hands always busy, eyes always lowered. "Move, human!" A guard snarled, shoving her so hard her shoulder hit a pillar. Her tray clattered to the floor, metal ringing in the chaos. Lyra caught herself, heart pounding, smoke already beginning to curl under the doors and down the corridors. Somewhere above, a second explosion boomed, and she heard the distant sound of stone breaking, glass shattering, and something heavy collapsing. The chandelier, she thought dizzily, the one she had spent all morning polishing, crystal by crystal. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. A stronger thought cut through her panic like a blade. The prince, little Adrien. He had been in the music room, high in the eastern wing, when she last delivered his evening tea. A gentle boy with dark curls and quiet eyes, always a little colder than other children, always shivering in draughts the vampires did not feel. Half human, the servants whispered. Weak blood, cursed blood. Lyra did not care. She had seen the way. He hugged his own arms when he was scared, how he tried not to cry when the older pure-blood children called him names. "Prince Adrien," she whispered, turning away from the path leading to the safe upper exits. Servants surged the other way, toward the gates, toward escape. Someone grabbed her arm. The king ordered all humans to the surface. Another maid shouted, eyes wild. "If you stay, you'll die." Lyra pulled free. "There's a child alone in the east wing," she said, though the other girl was already running, already gone. No one would go for him. No one ever went for him. So Lyra ran. The corridors shook as more blasts hit the outer walls, and smoke stung her throat. Twice she stumbled as the floor jumped, but she forced her feet to move, lifting her skirts so she would not trip. The door to the music room hung crooked on its hinges when she reached it. Inside, the polished wooden floor was scarred by fallen debris, the grand harp overturned, sheet music scattered like white leaves. "Adrien," she called, coughing. No answer. Then faintly, a whimper behind the fallen harp. Lyra dragged the instrument aside and found him there, curled in on himself, a thin silk tunic no match for the cold that seeped through the stone. His small body shook with violent tremors, eyes wide and wet. "Miss Lyra," he gasped, trying to sit up. I couldn't move." She checked him quickly, hands trembling. A bruise darkened his cheek. Dust clung to his curls, but nothing seemed broken. Only the shaking, the endless shaking. Another roar echoed below them, a sound that was not quite human and not quite vampire, twisted by rage and dark magic. Adrien flinched and tried to crawl closer to her. "We have to go," Lyra said, voice firm though fear clawed at her chest. "Can you hold on to me?" He nodded, but his legs refused to obey, so she scooped him into her arms. He was shockingly light, his skin cold as ice against her. Gold eyes, so much like his father's, stared up at her, full of trust and terror. She ran again, this time toward the servants' stairs that led down, away from the burning towers. Halfway down, something moved in the shadows below. A pale shape, eyes milky white, armor marked with the sigil of a rival clan. The creature lifted its head and sniffed the air. Human, it rasped, then its gaze locked on Adrien. And royal blood. Lyra's heart slammed against her ribs. There was no way past it on the stairs. She spun and bolted through a side door she had only ever used to carry laundry, racing. Along a narrow stone passage, as claws scraped the wall behind them. The creature howled, the sound twisting with hunger. Lyra did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to get him somewhere safe, somewhere the thing could not follow. A faded tapestry sagged on one wall, revealing the outline of a heavy iron door behind it. Lyra lunged for it. Adrien clutched against her. The door groaned as she yanked it open, every muscle straining. She stumbled inside, turned, and slammed it shut, just as the creature's body hit the other side. Dust rained from the ceiling. Adrien cried out, clinging to her neck. Lyra threw the bolt down, the ancient metal grinding into place. The door shuddered under another impact, then another, but it held. For a long moment, Lyra could only stand there, panting, her lungs burning. The cellar was deep and vast, supported by thick stone pillars that disappeared into darkness. No windows, no beds, no blankets, only cold. The air was so icy it felt wet, creeping under her skin, making her fingers go numb. Above them, the battle roared on, but down here there was only the sound of Adrien's shaking breath. "Ksu, cold," he chattered, teeth clacking. "It's so cooled." Lyra knelt and touched his forehead. His skin was like ice. Of course it was. He was half human, half vampire, too fragile for this kind of deep underground chill. In the village where she was born, winter had taken more lives than war. She knew the signs of cold creeping toward death. Lips losing color, fingers stiffening, eyes growing heavy. Her own body was already shivering, the thin maid's dress useless in the cellar's breath. She looked around desperately. There was nothing to burn, nothing to wrap him in, nothing but bare stone. Her cloak. It was the only thick thing she owned, a rough brown wool cloak given to her for winter service. Slowly, Lyra unfastened it, though the cold bit deeper the moment the fabric left her shoulders. She wrapped it around Adrien, tucking it tight under his chin. It helped a little, but not enough. His shivers only grew worse, turning into full-body tremors. I can't feel my hands," he whispered, voice small. Fear stabbed her. In the village, there had been a child once who slept in a barn a freezing night. By morning, his skin was blue, and he never woke up. Lyra swallowed hard. No, not this child, not tonight. She lowered herself onto the freezing stone floor and gently pulled Adrien down with her, pressing his small body against her chest. Shock of the cold shot through her bones, but she wrapped her arms and legs around him, making a tight cocoon of human warmth. "What are you doing?" He gasped, breath puffing white the thin light from cracks above. "Keeping you warm," she murmured, rubbing his back. "Humans are good at that. Our blood runs hot, remember?" "Father says humans are weak," Adrien said, voice dull and tired. "Maybe," Lyra said softly, "but right now, this weak human is not letting you die." He pressed his face against her shoulder, his shaking slow easing as her body heat seeped into him. Time became strange. Above them, distant crashes and roars rose and fell. The creature outside the door scratched once, then moved away, hunting easier prey. Lyra lay on the stone, every inch of her aching from cold, and whispered stories into the prince's ear. Tales her grandmother had told her, of foolish kings and brave girls, of dragons and hidden kingdoms. Anything to keep him awake, to keep him from drifting into the kind of sleep that never ended. At some point, a small hand found hers in the dark and clutched it tightly. "You won't leave?" Adrien whispered, voice breaking. "Everyone always leaves when it's dangerous." Lyra swallowed the lump in her throat. "I won't leave," she said, and meant it. Not until your father comes. Not until you're safe. Far above them, in a throne room streaked with blood and ash, King Lucian paused in the middle of battle, his heart twisting with something he did not understand. Through the ancient bond he shared with his son, he felt fear, that a strange warmth that was not vampire. He heard faintly a human girl's voice in the dark, steady and stubborn. I won't leave, not until your father comes. For the first time in 200 years, the vampire king's frozen heart gave a painful, unfamiliar throb as his son's shivering eased in the arms of a girl who had nothing but gave him everything. The morning came slowly, a weak gray light seeping through the cracks in the stone ceiling, as if even the sun feared entering the ruined citadel. Lyra's eyes opened with difficulty. Every muscle in her body ached from the cold stone floor, and her limbs felt stiff as wood. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then she felt a small weight against her chest and looked down to see Prince Edrine still asleep, wrapped in her cloak, his breathing shallow but steady. Relief washed through her so strong it nearly broke her. He was alive. She had kept him alive, but they were far from safe. Footsteps thundered above, sharper and more controlled than before. Soldiers, guards, the king's elite forces. The battle must have ended or shifted. Voices shouted orders, steel clanged against steel, and the ground vibrated with movement. Lyra gently shook Edrine. Wake up, sweetheart, she whispered, rubbing his cold hands between hers. His golden eyes fluttered open, confusion crossing his face before he remembered the night. Miss Lyra? You stayed. She smiled faintly. I told you I would. Before she could say more, the iron door behind them rattled violently, the bolt quivering. Lyra flinched, pulling Edrine close, bracing for the creature's return. But this was no monster. A familiar voice roared from the other side, deep, cold, powerful. Prince Edrine, are you inside? The king. Edrine lifted his head weakly. Father. Lyra pushed herself upright, pain stabbing through her legs where the cold had bitten deep. She forced her frozen fingers to lift the heavy bolt. The door swung open with a groan, and several armored guards flooded in, weapons drawn, eyes glowing red from battle and fury. Then he appeared. King Lucian. Tall, terrifying, dressed in black battle armor streaked with blood that wasn't his. His hair, dark as the ashes still drifting from the burning towers, was pushed back from his face, revealing sharp cheekbones, a jaw clenched tight, and eyes burning with golden fire. He scanned the cellar once and froze. Lyra was standing there in her torn dress, bruises on her arms, barefoot on the stone, clutching his half-frozen son, wrapped in her own cloak. Edrine reached toward him, but the king could not move. His immortal heart stuttered at the sight, at the memory he had felt through the blood bond. A human girl holding his child through the night, giving him warmth, keeping him alive. A girl lying on stone so he would not die. His expression darkened into something impossible to read. Then he stepped inside. The guards surrounded Lyra instantly, 3 of them grabbing her arms. Edrine cried out, No, don't hurt her. She saved me. But the guards didn't care. They saw only a human touching the air. Release the prince, one snarled. Humans do not lay hands on royal blood. Lyra tried to speak, but her throat was raw and dry. He was freezing. There was nothing else. She didn't get to finish. The guards yanked Edrine from her hold, making her stumble. The prince screamed in fear as cold air hit him. Father, tell them to stop. She didn't hurt me. She kept me warm. But the guards had already dragged Lyra to her knees, binding her wrists with silver-threaded rope meant to weaken humans even further. The king will decide her punishment, one hissed. Punishment, of course. She had touched the prince. She had broken the most sacred rule. King Lucian stared at her, not speaking, expression unreadable. His gaze traveled over her bruises, her raw red skin from the cold, her trembling hands, then to his son, whose lips were still pale, whose small body still shook without her warmth. The king's jaw clenched. He turned away. "Take them," he commanded. Lyra barely had time to catch her breath as she and the prince were taken through the ruined lower corridors, up the winding staircases, and finally into the throne hall, a place she had only seen once from afar. The massive black throne stood cracked from last night's battle, the stained glass windows shattered, sunlight spilling in jagged patterns across the ravaged floor. Nobles and soldiers gathered in a tense circle, whispering as the guards forced Lyra to kneel in the center. Adrien was carried to the royal healers, who wrapped him in enchanted blankets and examined him frantically. "Your Majesty," cried Lady Selene, a high-born pure-blood noble with silver eyes and venom in her voice. "The human girl endangers the heir. She must be executed for touching royal flesh." Gasps rippled through the hall. Lyra's stomach twisted. Executed? Was that really what would happen? Another noble stepped forward, a tall man with sharp fangs and disdain dripping from every word. "Humans are weak creatures, Your Majesty. This one probably tried to escape with the prince, or use him for bargaining." Others began to agree, piling accusations like stones meant to crush her. She defied orders. She disobeyed the evacuation. She handled the prince as though he were her own. Disgraceful. Disgusting. Lyra bowed her head, unable to speak through the pain in her throat. No one here would believe her. No one here cared that she had saved him. Then the king stepped forward. The hall fell silent instantly. His presence alone commanded fear. He looked at Lyra, truly looked. She had dark circles under her eyes from a sleepless, freezing night. Her fingers were blue from the cold. Her knees shook from exhaustion. But her chin was lifted. She was not begging, not crying, not apologizing. She waited for judgment with quiet dignity. "Stand," he said. She could not. Her legs gave out when she tried. 2 guards forced her upright, and she winced in pain. King Lucian's eyes narrowed by a fraction so small, no one noticed, except her. "Explain yourself," he ordered. Her voice was cracked and small. "He was cold." "Cold?" Lady Selene scoffed. "That is your excuse?" Lyra swallowed hard. He was shaking so badly he could not walk. His body was freezing in the cellar. "If I left him, he would have died." She looked at the prince, whose small hand was reaching toward her from the healer's table. "I couldn't leave him alone. Not in the dark. Not in that cold." Murmurs spread. Some skeptical. Some confused. Some disgusted. "Lies," someone muttered. "Humans always lie. She's trying to make herself a hero." The king held up a hand. Silence dropped like a blade. "How did you keep him warm?" he asked quietly, dangerously, "in a room of stone and ice." Lyra took a shaky breath. "I lay on the ground," she whispered, "and I held him. All night." The hall erupted in outrage. Shameful. Unthinkable. Kill her before she contaminates the prince. Adrien suddenly sat up, pushing aside the blankets, tears burning in his eyes. "Stop, she saved me," he shouted, voice cracking. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't feel my legs. She held me until morning. She kept her promise. The court froze. A child's testimony carried power. The king's eyes flickered, then hardened again, hiding something behind gold fire. "Enough," Lucian said. The room fell silent instantly. He stepped closer to Lyra, towering over her trembling form. "You defied orders," he said. "You risked your life. A pause. The hall waited for the death sentence. Then his voice dropped dangerously soft. Why? Lyra lifted her eyes to him for the first time. Because no child deserves to die alone, she said simply. Not even a prince. Something cracked inside the king. Just a hairline fracture. But it was enough. Guards, he commanded. Lyra braced. Release her. Gasps echoed everywhere. She will not be punished. Lady Selene stumbled in shock. Your Majesty, this is madness. Silence, he snapped, his voice cutting like a blade. The prince lives because of her. He looked at Lyra again, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. This human maid kept my son alive when half my army could not reach him. His next words struck the hall like thunder. From this moment forward, she will serve as the prince's personal attendant. Adrien gasped with relief. Lyra's breath caught. The nobles looked as if they had swallowed poison. The king turned away, but his voice echoed with something half-hidden, half-felt. No one touches my son without my command, he said. But no one harms the girl who saved him. For the first time, Lyra saw at the faintest edge of humanity hidden behind the king's immortal eyes. And it terrified her more than any monster in the night. The castle felt different after the king's decree, as though every wall, every corridor, every watching eye had turned sharper and colder. Lyra followed the guards silently through the long halls, her wrists still raw from the silver-threaded rope that had bound her only minutes before. Her legs trembled from exhaustion, but she forced herself to stay upright, refusing to appear weak in front of the nobles, who already despised her. When they reached the prince's private chambers, the guards stepped aside without a word. The healers had already prepared a bed with enchanted blankets, warm enough to melt frost, and Adrien sat propped against the pillows, still pale but no longer shivering. His golden eyes lit up when he saw her. Miss Lyra, he whispered, reaching out. She hesitated, unsure if touching him again would anger someone, but the prince leaned forward until his small hands wrapped around hers. Don't let them take you away. Lyra felt her heart twist. I won't, she said softly. The king has ordered me to stay with you. Adrien exhaled in relief and sank back into the pillows. But not everyone was relieved. Standing by the window, arms crossed and face carved from stone, was King Lucien. He did not speak, did not blink, merely watched Lyra with eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. She bowed quickly. Your Majesty. He did not acknowledge the greeting. Instead, he turned to the healers. Leave us. Within seconds, the room emptied, leaving only the king, the prince, and the human girl who had broken one of the oldest laws of the vampire court. Adrien tugged Lyra's sleeve. Sit with me, he whispered. She obeyed, settling beside him on the edge of the bed. Her body still ached from lying on the cellar floor all night, but she hid the discomfort. The prince needed calm, not fear. For a long moment, silence filled the chamber. Then the king finally spoke. Tell me what happened, Lucien said, his voice low and cold, though underneath it, Lyra sensed something tightening, something like restrained panic. She took a deep breath and recounted everything. The explosions, the smoke, the creature with milky eyes, the desperate run through the servant passages, the hidden door, the cold that swallowed the cellar whole. She kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled. When she described Adrien shaking uncontrollably, the king's jaw clenched. When she explained tearing off her cloak to wrap him, he inhaled sharply, barely audible. And when she reached the part where she lay down on the stone and pressed the prince against her to keep him alive, the king's eyes darkened to near black, as if imagining the scene hurt him in some ancient, invisible way. When she finished, Lucien stepped closer until he stood right in front of her. She held her breath. He was terrifying up close tall, powerful, carved from something older than time itself. He could have killed her with a thought. Instead, he studied her bruised arms, the raw red patches on her skin, the veins in her hands still blue from cold. "You nearly froze to death," he said, voice low. Lyra lowered her eyes. "It was the only way to keep him warm." "Why didn't you leave when the attack started?" he demanded quietly. "Why didn't you run with the other humans?" She swallowed hard. Because he was alone. Something flickered in Adrian's golden eyes. Something deeper flickered in the king's. Lucien turned away abruptly, as though the conversation was shaking something inside him that he didn't want exposed. "You will stay here," he said, his tone regaining its icy edge. "You will attend to the prince until I decide otherwise." Lyra bowed. "Yes, your majesty." The king strode toward the door. His hand was on the handle when Adrien called softly, "Father." "She didn't leave me." Lucien froze. For a moment, the room was utterly still. Then, without looking back, he said, "I know." The door closed behind him. Adrien leaned against Lyra's arm, exhausted. "He's not angry with you," the boy whispered. "He's angry with himself." Lyra blinked. "Why would he be angry at himself?" "Because he felt everything I felt. The whole night. Through the blood bond. And he couldn't reach me." The words hit Lyra like a blow. The king had felt the prince's terror, and the warmth that came from her. The thought made her heart pound in a strange, frightening way. Hours passed. The healers returned and applied salves to Lyra's frostbitten hands, murmuring disapproval about human fragility. Adrien fell asleep with his hand still loosely holding hers. She tried to pull away, but his fingers tightened even in sleep. She let him hold her. As dusk fell, a soft knock sounded at the chamber door. A maid entered Maris, a pure-blood vampire with flawless skin and calculating eyes. She carried a tray of food, but her sneer was barely hidden. "Here," she said coldly, setting the tray down near Lyra. "For the prince." "Not for you." Lyra ignored the insult. She was used to it. But Maris wasn't finished. "You must feel proud," she whispered harshly. "A low-born human girl sitting beside the heir as if you matter." Lyra kept her gaze steady. "I'm only doing what the king ordered." "Oh, he ordered much more than that," Maris hissed, stepping closer. "He shamed the noble council for you. He defended you in front of the entire court. And now he has placed you in the prince's private quarters. You think the rest of us will accept that?" Lyra stiffened. "I have no interest in replacing anyone." "You already have," Maris spat. "The prince hasn't let go of your hand for hours." As if on cue, Adrien stirred in his sleep, gripping Lyra's fingers tighter. Jealous fury flashed in Maris's eyes. "Enjoy the king's protection while it lasts, human," she whispered. "But remember this, no matter what you did, you are still nothing." She turned sharply and left. Lyra let out a shaky breath. She could handle cruelty. She had lived with it all her life. But she worried what the king's unexpected defense had stirred in the nobles and the bitterness, danger. Night settled. The fires of the citadel were finally under control. The halls were quiet, except for distant footsteps of patrolling guards. Adrien slept peacefully for the first time in months, his small body no longer shaking. Lyra rested her head against the bedpost, too tired to move. She didn't notice when the chamber door opened again with barely a sound. She didn't notice the king standing in the doorway, watching her and his son. What he saw made him stop breathing. Adrien curled against Lyra's side, face peaceful in a way the healer's magic had never achieved. Lyra's eyes closed in exhausted slumber. Her body slumped in the chair, her hand still protecting the prince's. The king stepped closer, silent as a shadow. For years his son had slept fitfully, restless anxious, cold even under layers of enchanted blankets. But now, in the arms of a human girl, the boy slept as though nothing in the world could harm him. Lucien's throat tightened, an emotion rising inside him like a memory he had long buried. Slowly, almost unconsciously, he reached out and brushed a single strand of Lyra's hair away from her face. His fingers stopped halfway, hovering, trembling. He pulled back sharply as if burned. His own reaction terrified him. As he turned to leave, he paused once more, staring at the girl who had shattered centuries of distance with one night on a cold stone floor. "What are you doing to us?" he whispered to the darkness. And for the first time, the Vampire King feared something he could not fight. Not enemies, not monsters, but the quiet, dangerous warmth of a human heart. The next morning, the atmosphere in the citadel changed in a way Lyra felt instantly, like a storm building behind closed doors. News had spread faster than fire, faster than fear, that a human maid had dared to keep the prince alive by holding him through the night, and that the king had defended her in front of the entire court. Every noble, every servant, every guard seemed to stare at her when she walked Adrien through the sunlit corridors for his morning checkup. Their eyes carried anger, jealousy, suspicion, and disgust. But Adrien clung to her hand tightly, refusing to let go even when the healers asked him to. "She stays," he said stubbornly, and no one dared argue with the prince. But the whispers followed them. Weak human, trying to rise above her place. How dare she stand beside the heir? Lyra lowered her gaze and said nothing, but she felt each cruel word like a cold blade pressed to her skin. As they walked through the grand hall, a group of pure-blood noblewomen blocked their path. They were dressed in shimmering silks, their pale skin flawless, their eyes sharp with superiority. Lady Selene, the cruelest among them, stepped forward with a cold smile. "Well, well," she said loudly, making sure everyone nearby heard. "If it isn't the little human girl who slept in the prince's chamber." Several nobles gasped, pretending to be offended. Corinne tensed beside Lyra, gripping her arm. Lyra bowed her head respectfully, hoping it would end quickly. "I was only doing my duty," she said quietly. Selene laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Duty? Don't pretend you're noble. You are nothing but a maid who took advantage of a frightened child." Adrien's face turned red with anger. "She saved my life," he shouted. Selene crouched slightly so she was eye level with him, though her expression remained mocking. "And you think that makes her important? She is human. They are useful for cleaning floors, not touching princes." Lyra felt her stomach twist, but she forced her voice to stay calm. "Lady Selene, please. This is not appropriate in front of the prince." "Silence," Selene snapped. "You speak only when spoken to." The other nobles smirked. A few servants giggled nervously. Lyra lowered her eyes, not because she agreed, but because she didn't want Adrien to become more upset. But the noblewoman wasn't done. She reached out and grabbed Lyra's chin with her cold fingers, lifting her face roughly. "Look at me," she commanded. Lyra stayed still, though her skin burned where Selene touched her. "Do you truly believe that your filthy human warmth is more valuable than the protection of a royal guard? Do you think you saved him because you are special?" Lyra opened her mouth to speak, but Adrien stepped between them, his small body trembling with rage. "Don't touch her," he cried. Selene blinked in shock. No pure-blood child had ever spoken to her like that. "Adrien," she said, her tone turning icy. "You forget your place." "No," Adrien shouted. "You forget yours. Miss Lyra protected me when no one else came. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She stayed with me. She promised she wouldn't leave. And she didn't." His voice cracked, tears gathering in his eyes. Lyra knelt beside him quickly, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. "Adrien, it's all right," she whispered. "You don't need to fight for me." But Selene wasn't finished. She straightened and glared at Lyra. "How dare you influence the heir like this?" she hissed. "He defends you as if you are his." Before she could finish the sentence, the air in the hall shifted. A cold wind swept through the corridor, dimming the torches, silencing the whispers. Every noble stiffened. Every guard bowed instantly. The prince gasped and clung to Lyra's arm. King Lucien had arrived. He approached in slow, controlled steps, his presence filling the corridor like a storm. His cloak trailed behind him, his expression carved from shadow and fire. When he spoke, his voice was soft but terrifying. "What," he said, eyes locked on Selene, "is happening here?" Selene immediately bent into a graceful bow, her arrogance evaporating. "Your Majesty, I was simply correcting the maid." She overstepped. Overstepped? The king's voice dropped lower. "By protecting my son?" Selene swallowed hard. No, Your Majesty. I only meant—" "You meant to humiliate her," Lucien said, stepping closer, his golden eyes blazing. "You meant to frighten my son. You meant to disgrace the person who kept the heir alive when the rest of you were running for your own lives." A ripple of shock swept through the crowd. Selene's face drained of color. "Your Majesty, I would never—" "Silence," he said, and the word cracked like thunder. He looked around the hall slowly, his gaze sharp enough to cut stone. "I know what you all whisper. I know how you look at her. I know what you believe about humans." The nobles trembled. The king stepped beside Lyra and Adrien, positioning himself like a shield. "But hear this," he said, his voice echoing dangerously. "When my son was trapped, freezing, dying, none of you reached him." His gaze darkened. "But she did." Lyra froze. Adrien lifted his chin proudly. The king continued. "She held him through the night. She endured the cold. She risked death. And she kept the future of this kingdom alive." His next words were like a blade thrown into the heart of every noble watching. "From this moment forward, anyone who insults her, insults the royal family." Gasps filled the hall. Selene's eyes widened in horror. The king gestured to the guards. "Lady Selene will be relieved of her duties for 1 month. She will leave the citadel before sunset." Selene choked on a breath. "Why, Your Majesty, exile? For a human?" Lucien's gaze hardened. "For touching what is mine to protect." Silence swallowed the hall. Selene stumbled backward in shock as guards approached her. Lyra's heart raced. She hadn't expected punishment this harsh. As Selene was escorted away, the king turned to Lyra. His voice softened, but only slightly. "Are you unharmed?" Lyra nodded shakily. "Yes, Your Majesty." Adrien clung to her hand. The king looked down at their linked fingers, and something unreadable flickered in his eyes. "Good," he said quietly, "because I will not allow anyone in this citadel to harm you again." For a moment, Lyra forgot how to breathe. The nobles watched with wide eyes, realizing something none of them had anticipated. The king wasn't just protecting her out of duty. Something was changing inside him. Something dangerous. Something warm. The citadel buzzed like a beehive, shaken by a storm the moment Lady Selene was escorted out. And it was clear to Lyra that the nobles were not only shocked, but frightened that a human girl now stood under the vampire king's personal protection. That fear quickly turned into bitterness. Whispers spread through every corridor, every balcony, every shadowed corner. Why is the king protecting her? A human girl should not stand near the heir. This is dangerous. She will bring ruin to the court. Lyra heard it all as she walked Adrien back to his chamber. Though the boy held her hand tightly, refusing to let her slip even an inch behind him. When they arrived, 2 guards were posted outside elite soldiers, not the usual patrolmen. Lyra hesitated, surprised. "Father ordered them," Adrien said proudly. "He doesn't want anyone to bother you." The words both warmed and terrified her. Inside, the chamber glowed with gentle firelight, and Lyra sat beside the prince while he rested after the earlier stress. She hummed softly, stroking his hair until he finally fell asleep. When he was steady, she took a moment to breathe, but the peace didn't last long. A knock sounded. Before Lyra could rise, the door opened slowly, and the vampire king entered with silent, powerful steps. He dismissed the guards, then closed the door behind him with a soft click. Lyra immediately stood, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty." Lucien studied her for a long moment, his eyes lingering on the faint bruises from where Celine had gripped her chin earlier. His jaw tightened. "Are you certain you're unhurt?" His voice was low, unusually controlled. Lyra nodded quickly. "I'm fine, Your Majesty." "Do not lie," he said sharply, stepping closer. She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm only a little shaken, but I'm fine." He stopped just a few feet away, golden eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her heartbeat flutter strangely. "I do not want anyone to touch you again," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried centuries of authority. Lyra blinked. "Your Majesty, I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want the nobles to resent your decisions. My decisions are not theirs to judge." Lucien cut in, voice hardening. "And you are not the cause of their resentment. Their arrogance is." Lyra lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. The king stepped even closer now, his voice softer. "Adrien tells me you stayed awake the whole night, whispering stories to him." She flushed slightly. "I just wanted to keep him calm." "You did more than that," Lucien said quietly. "You gave him comfort he has never received from anyone since his mother died." Lyra's breath caught. A silence settled between them, thick, dangerous, warm. Lucien looked toward his sleeping son for a moment, and when he returned his gaze to Lyra, something inside him seemed exposed, vulnerable. "Humans have a strange kind of strength," he murmured, "soft, but steady, gentle, but fierce when needed." His eyes softened in a way Lyra had never seen before. "I see that in you." Her heart threatened to burst. "Your Majesty," she whispered, unsure if she should look away or hold his gaze. Lucien stepped back suddenly, as if realizing he had come too close to a line he had sworn never to cross. "You should rest. You're exhausted." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "If anyone harms you again, tell me immediately." And with that, he was gone, leaving Lyra frozen, wondering what exactly had changed in that moment. But the castle had no patience for quiet emotions. Danger walked its halls like a second shadow. Later that evening, while Lyra was preparing warm tea for Adrien, she overheard 2 nobles arguing in a corridor. She didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices were loud, furious. "The king is losing his mind over that maid. We cannot allow a human to influence the heir. This is a threat to the balance of the court. Something must be done." Before Lyra could slip away, something cold and sharp brushed her neck, a jeweled dagger. Held by Lord Varos, one of the king's most ruthless council members. His voice slithered into her ear. "You will learn your place sooner or later, girl. The king's favor won't protect you forever." Lyra froze, terrified but silent. Just then, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Varos withdrew the dagger in an instant, replacing it with a charming smile as King Lucien appeared at the end of the hall. Lucien's eyes narrowed, sensing danger. "Varos," he said coldly, "what are you doing in the prince's wing?" Varos bowed deeply. Simply checking the security of the area, Your Majesty. The king stepped closer, gaze shifting to Lyra. Her face was pale, her breathing unsteady. A predator's instinct flashed through Lucian Ancient lethal. Did he touch you? He demanded. Lyra hesitated. Varos's eyes flickered with silent warning. But Lyra had survived a night of monsters, cold, and death. She would not lie now, not when the king had already risked so much for her. Yes, she whispered. Lucian's fury ignited with a force that shook the air. He seized Varos by the throat, faster than any human eye could track, slamming him against the wall hard enough to crack the stone. You dare threaten what is under my protection? Lucian roared. Varos choked, struggling to speak. Why, Your Majesty, I meant no harm. Liar. The king's voice was a blade made of ice. You frighten a human girl. You threaten the prince's attendant. You challenge my authority. He tightened his grip. This is treason. Lyra stepped forward in panic. Your Majesty, please? Lucian looked at her, his fury shifting for a moment into something softer. He threatened you. I will not let anyone do that. I don't want blood spilled because of me, she whispered. Lucian's jaw clenched. Slowly, reluctantly, he released Varos, who collapsed to the floor, gasping. You will leave the citadel within the hour, the king commanded. And if you ever return, I will finish what I started. Guards rushed forward to drag the disgraced lord away. When they were gone, the king turned to Lyra. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by fear for her. I told you, he said quietly, stepping close enough for his voice to wrap around her like heat. I will protect you, no matter what it costs. Lyra felt something inside her break open, something she had long kept hidden. Why? She whispered. Lucian didn't answer for a moment. Then, with a voice softer than she had ever heard, he said, Because losing you would feel like losing the last warm part of this world. The words shattered her breath. For the first time, she understood exactly what was happening. The king's heart, frozen for centuries, was beginning to thaw. And she was the reason. The citadel fell into an uneasy silence after Lord Varos's exile. But beneath that silence, danger continued to pulse like a hidden heartbeat. Lyra felt it every time she stepped into the hall, every time she heard nobles whisper behind her, every time she caught a sharp glance from someone who believed she didn't deserve to breathe the same air as the royal family. The king increased security around the prince and around her, posting elite guards at every corner, but even that couldn't erase the bitterness brewing in the shadows. As the days went on, Shivering grew stronger, his color returning, his shivering fading, his laughter brightening the cold halls in a way Lyra had never seen before. He clung to her, sitting with her during meals, holding her hand while she read him stories, even asking her to stay in the room until he fell asleep. The king watched all of this quietly, as if each small gesture, each smile Shivering gave her, pulled something warm and unfamiliar inside him. But peace never stayed long in the vampire citadel. Word came one evening, carried on a breathless guard's tongue, that enemy clans were regrouping in the mountains. A second attack was likely one that aimed not only for the citadel, but specifically for the prince. The king immediately ordered the court to evacuate the eastern halls and prepare for a defensive strike. Lyra understood the danger, but she stayed with Shivering, refusing to leave his side. As night fell, the sky turned blood-red with the reflection of distant fires, and an eerie howl echoed across the cliffs surrounding the fortress. Shivering clutched Lyra's sleeve in fear. Miss Lyra, are they coming again? She knelt in front of him, brushing a lock of dark hair from his forehead. If they do, I will be right here. I won't let anything happen to you. A small, trembling smile formed on his lips. But just then, the loud crash of steel rang from the outer balcony. The doors burst open as 3 enemy assassins slipped into the prince's chamber pale, monstrous, wearing the sigil of the rival lord. Their eyes gleamed with hatred. "The half-breed heir," one snarled. "Kill him." Lyra didn't think she moved. She pushed Adrien behind her, arms spread wide even though she had no weapons, no strength compared to vampires. One assassin lunged at the prince, but Lyra grabbed a heavy candlestick and swung it with all her might. It struck his jaw, sending him stumbling. The second assassin grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully as he laughed cruelly. "Human filth," he spat. "You dare stand in our way?" Lyra kicked him, shoved him, did anything she could to keep them away from Adrien. But she was only human, she knew that. The first assassin recovered and moved toward the prince again. Without thinking, Lyra threw herself between them, taking the blow to her side instead. Pain exploded through her body. She fell hard, gasping, but her arms wrapped around Adrien as she shielded him with everything she had. "Stay behind me, Adrien," she whispered through clenched teeth. "I promised." "I won't leave." The assassins laughed darkly, raising their blades for the final strike when a thunderous roar split the air. The chamber door burst open. King Lucien stood there, eyes burning with golden fury, fangs bared, power shaking the walls around him. "Get away from them," he growled. The assassins turned, startled, but they were too late. The king moved faster than wind, faster than death. In a blur of black cloak and furious power, he struck the first assassin down, then the second, then the third, each falling like broken shadows. When the last one collapsed, the king stood panting, chest rising and falling with rage. He turned and froze. Lyra was on the ground, blood staining her dress, her body wrapped protectively around the trembling prince. That sight shattered him. In 2 strides, he was at her side, kneeling in a way no king should ever kneel. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard. Her breath trembled. Are you both safe?" "You protected him," Lucien said, cupping her face with trembling hands. "You protected my son with your life." Again, Adrien clung to Lyra's neck, crying softly. "Don't die," he begged. "Please don't die. You're my warm light." The king gathered both of them into his arms, holding them as if the world would break if he let go. "Heal her," he commanded as healers rushed in. "Now." They worked frantically, wrapping her wounds, pouring glowing potions onto her skin, whispering ancient spells. Through it all, Lyra drifted in and out of consciousness, her eyes finding the king whenever she could. "Why? Are you looking at me like that?" she whispered weakly. Lucien leaned close, his forehead nearly touching hers. "Because I almost lost you," he murmured. "And losing you would destroy me." The healers gasped softly, but the king didn't care. He looked at Adrien, then back at Lyra, and something fierce, something final settled in his voice. "Everyone leave," he ordered. The room emptied. Only the 3 of them remained, the king, the prince, and the human girl who changed everything. Lucien took Lyra's hand with a gentleness that didn't belong to a vampire king. "Lyra," he said, voice low and rough, "you endured cold, hunger, pain, fear, all to protect my son. You faced monsters with nothing but your courage." Her eyes shimmered. "He needed me." "I need you," the king whispered. Her breath caught. Adrien looked up at both of them, his small voice breaking with emotion. "Can she stay with us, always?" Lucien swallowed hard, the decision already formed in his heart. He stood and raised Lyra carefully, holding her as though she were a queen made of light. He turned toward the door, his voice echoing with royal power. "From this day forward," he said, "the girl who kept the heir alive will never again sleep on the ground. She will never again be treated as less. She belongs to the royal family." Gasps echoed through the halls as nobles gathered, stunned and speechless. "Lyra," the king said, his voice carrying across the citadel, "is under my protection and under my heart." Adrien reached up and took Lyra's hand, whispering, "Our warm light. Stay with us." Lyra looked at both of them through tears, one powerful king with a thawing heart, and one little prince clinging to her with love, and for the first time she realized she was no longer alone. She had become their warmth, their courage, their family, and nothing in the vampire kingdom would ever be the same again.